Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business and People podcast. Today, it's my honor, it's my privilege, actually, to host this very special episode. Recently, I had the fortune of being introduced to an organization that's making a global impact. And it's not very often that people can actually back that claim up. But I had the fortune of being introduced to this organization and then being introduced to the chairman of the amazing organization that is B1G1. Today with us on the show, as I said, it is my privilege to host Mr. Paul Dunn, who is an entrepreneur by his own rights, going all the way back to his roots in accounting and actually being one of the first 10 members of Hewlett-Packard in Australia, certainly. Paul's then gone on to become a Tedx speaker and now chairman of the B1G1 Foundation. He is an incredible human being who is reaching and impacting lives through the work of B1G1. And I'm going to talk to Paul about his background and how that all came together. But I'm also going to ask him to speak about the organization that is B1G1 and how that organization is giving back to local communities in everything from things as simple as providing clean drinking water and safe living environments, all the way through to more complex things like engaging entrepreneurs in third world and developing countries to literally change the economies of where they are. This is work that's being done at a personal level, one-on-one, by thousands of people all around the world. And it's impacting societies, it's impacting communities, it's impacting families. And it gives me no greater pleasure than to welcome Paul to the show. Let's talk about B1G1 and let's find out how this amazing organization came to be and where it's moving to from here. Paul, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Hey, Bob, that's great. And then you mentioned, or someone said to me that you should hear the introductions that Walt gives. You know, they're amazing. That was an amazing introduction. And I just want you to know, first of all, I'm so grateful for that, but also I'm so grateful and very privileged to be sharing all of this stuff with you. And thank you so much for having me here.
It's a pleasure. Do you know, one of the joys I get from my position, Paul, is that as I'm looking at some of the incredible guests that have come onto our show, I get the chance to go back and look at our history. And of course, being in the digital age, all of those things are available. You know, I guess whatever we choose to put up online is there. And sometimes when I get to introduce amazing people that have been on our show, I get to dig into that a little bit. And bringing that up to the surface, there's not a single word of any introduction I've ever done for any guest that has been embellished. And that's actually a real testament to the people that have been here before you and to the people that have agreed to generously give their time out to our audience. So it is my pleasure to welcome you, mate. And every one of those comments is endorsed, and I didn't even go into 1/10 of it. So what about you tell us the story of how you got to where you are?
Well, you know what, it's interesting. I mean, when people ask you that question, you're supposed to tell, you know, the sort of Joseph Campbell hero's journey sort of story, you know, that my life was a mess and then, you know, I found something and turned it around. And those are exciting stories, right?
Sure.
But interesting, I don't see it that way. I was born a long time ago and in a very poor little village, and my dad was a miner and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But I see it as one of amazing luck. I mean, amazing luck. You know, how lucky, you mentioned Hewlett-Packard, right? How lucky could it be that you get sort of picked out of a group when you're 21 and said, okay, well, come to Australia. This is from the United Kingdom where I was born. And, you know, get to be one of the first 10 in HP in Australia. I mean, literally sitting and having breakfast with, you know, Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, if you want to take the really fast trip forward, you know, last year in November, I was very privileged to be speaking in an audience of some 5,300 in Silicon Valley. Wow. And you know, I can remember going to Silicon Valley when it was basically Bill and Dave. I mean, because, right, you know, they
still have their names on those foundational bricks, you know.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know, how lucky can you be to, you know, have you know, in a way sort of been a part of that, and you know, it gives you a really interesting perspective, because they were doing things way back then, we look at now and go, wow, that was just amazing, the way they did that. And interestingly enough, when I was in HP in Palo Alto, little did I know that when I was there, I was in the research labs in Palo Alto for a couple of days. And little did I know that one of the products that I was kind of responsible for in Australia, I think called the 9866, was that there was a young intern whose name was Steve Jobs working on that particular project right there in Palo Alto. But, he was just an intern. So,
wow.
So we never got to say hello, but,
There's a book that I read a few years ago called Uncommon Friends. And it's incredible how the threads of these stories are interwoven so many times.
Yeah, exactly. And so, then from there you get that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so after some years there, then I went and I created what a lot of people regard as Australia's first computer company. And that was like, amazing, just amazing to be able to do that. Then, but 1980, they're going back then, I got, again, very lucky. Someone literally dragged me to a seminar. I mean, they said, why don't you come to this thing called a seminar? We didn't even know what seminars were back then. And I said, why do I want to go? We've got 150 people. We're doing $23 million. Why would I want to go? And they literally dragged me. And I was in front of James Rohn, and here was Jim Rohn, who's, and died, 4 years ago now. And I mean, I didn't much like the way Rohn moved. If you've ever seen Rohn, he didn't move. He was sort of behind the lectern. And
very stationary.
That. But I loved what came out of his mouth. Yeah. And that was one of those moments. And I literally that night called my colleagues in the computer company and said, I'm out of here. I'm out of here.
No way.
Literally. And they said, well, and it was the 6th of December, 1980. And they literally said, could you give us a little while?
Yeah.
So I said, okay. So then on the 1st of April, 1981, because when I listened to Rohn, it was a weird thing, Walt. It was like a time tunnel. It was like a spiral. And here was he in the middle of that time tunnel, but then it was me in the middle of that time tunnel. And so I saw myself as, speaking and working with audiences around the world. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but I knew that was that was the calling, if you like. Right? And so then that created a thing called the Results Corporation. And there's not a week goes by now, even when people say, oh, I remember the blood room. And, we grew that to work with, 23,000 small to medium scale enterprises right around the world, and some big ones as well, Qantas and people like that. Then got into realizing that all of those 23,000 entrepreneurs that we were so privileged to be working with actually had one thing in common, and that common thing was that they had accountants, right? And so then I started to think about that, and I thought, well, hang on a second. If we want to influence as many people as possible, and if they've all got one thing in common, then why not talk with those people? And a lot of people think, I am an accountant, but I'm not. But I think it's a great benefit that I was not, because I had a different perspective. And I was able to see back then that, accountants, if you ask them generally, well, what is it you do? If they were being really honest about it, they would say, well, we report on history. And I remember thinking, how cool would it be if they could turn that on its head and say, well, what we do is we help our selected clients create history.
Wow.
And so that opened up a thing called the Accountants Bootcamp. We had, 17,700 accountants come through that. And that it was just amazing, absolutely amazing. And then in the year 2000, I sold all of that, went to live in France, sensibly to retire. But you probably get that was like the worst thing ever, trying to do that. But I was under all sorts of, legal things that I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, because I just sold everything. And then in 2006, 2003 comes along. I've been writing books and stuff then, and I got to speak at some conferences again, and realized that was where it was for me. And so then started mentoring a whole lot of people. And then again, how lucky can you be? I'm in this mentoring session with a young Japanese lady. Her name is Masami Sato. And she was at the time where I was, which was in Brisbane, although this particular thing happened in Bali, at a particular event. And she's in the room, and you know how it is with mentoring. It's usually the mentor that asks the questions, and the mentee, is that the right term for it? The mentee, they sort of respond to the question. Yeah. And she began and this particular thing. And when she came into the session, you could see there's been some stuff going on. You could just feel it, Yeah. And she said, would it be okay if I asked you a question? And I said, well, sure, go. And she said, well, let me phrase it this way. She said, I just want you to imagine. I remember her using the word imagine. She said, imagine a world where every time business was done, something great happened. And I said, yeah, like what, And she said, well, as I tell you about it, she said, I've given this thing a name in my head. She said, I've called it buy one, give one. So I said, okay, so how would that work? And she said, imagine you go into Harvey Norman, for example. That was the exact word she used. For those of you who don't know what Harvey Norman is, it's electronic
Best Buy, or it's or any of
yeah, Best Buy, exactly. Best Buy, same thing. And she said, imagine you go buy a plasma TV, and I said, whoa, hang on a second. You said this is called buy one, give one. Is that right? She said, yeah. I said, well, I don't get that, because if I go in and I buy a plasma TV, they're not going to give me another one, So what are you talking about? And she said, no. She said, look at it this way. She said, imagine you go buy a plasma TV. Now, why are you doing that? You're doing that because you want better vision, in a sense, right? Mm. So how would it be when you bought that plasma TV if someone who could not see got the gift of sight? And wow. Exactly. And then she hears that suck of air, and she said, or imagine you got a cup of coffee, and as a result of getting that cup of coffee, a child in need got access to pure life-saving water. Oh my God. And then she said, or imagine someone buys one of your books, and as a result of that, a tree gets planted. And I'm like, oh my God. And she said, I said to her, Masami, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard of. Can I be your mentor for the rest of your life?
Nice.
And finally, she said yes to that. And neither of us understood what that actually meant. What it actually meant could you fund it
right.
for a while? And but it took 3 years. I mean, that's seemingly a simple idea, right? But a profoundly simple idea. But you could imagine that it took a long time to, particularly given the sort of things you do as well, a long time to figure that out. How do you do it? What are the processes that you have to put in place? How do you find the projects? How do you make sure that 100% goes? How do you measure the impact of all of that? Right? So it was 3 years of pretty interesting work trying to figure all that out. And then you fast forward, and now, just today, I think it was, we crossed 202 million giving impacts. So, it's like amazing story.
I want to dig into that, because that's one of the things that for me, when I was introduced to B1G1 just a very short time ago, it was the impacts. And so when I look at what is an impact, and perhaps you can do the audience the favor of defining that better than I can. So I'll give it a shot and then you jump in. But
yeah, go.
You're talking about over 212 million impacts. And ladies and gentlemen who are listening, I just want to focus in on that just for a second. An impact is, as Paul mentioned when first introduced to the concept by Mazzani, an impact is a difference made to somebody's life. So that impact can be various. In a malaria-infected area, it might be a mosquito net. In an area in Africa where there is no clean water, it might be water for a day. It might be a victim of sexual abuse being educated back into society and changing their life. That's an impact. And over 212 million.
Or it could be, or it could be, in Australia, it could be, and there's lots of projects there, as you know, but it could be, in fact, it's one of my favorite stories. It could be giving a kid who used to spend their entire life sniffing petrol.
Yep.
It could be giving them access to, in this particular case, actually, computer education, so that they now grab the skills. By the way, interestingly, the project that we work with there, all of our projects are amazing. This particular project is interesting in as much as, there's that big petrol sniffing stuff going on, right? And so the people that run the project actually had the courage to go to BP and Shell and say, guys, why don't you make petrol that cannot be sniffed? Why don't you do that? Yeah. And amazingly enough, they did. And so the creation of what that did is dropped the petrol sniffing thing to a level of 92% of what it was.
Wow.
And and then of course what you have is kids going, okay, so what do I do now?
Yeah. Why don't I go and play footy instead? And why don't I?
Exactly. So, and that's it. That we think about the impact on lives, and the thing that's really interesting too is it's never the impact on one life. I mean, we measure it as the impact on one life, but it's actually the impact of then that life, then sort of
the family, the community, society, the globe. I mean, that ripple effect is incredible. When I look at the B1G1 website, which anybody that's listening can get involved, and again, I'll explain my experience, and then you guys can see how it goes. It's we're all familiar with Amazon, right? So we can go to Amazon or Best Buy or any of the other online retailers that are out there, and we can say, I want one of those, and we can just add that stuff to our basket, and we can check out, and a few days later it gets delivered. That's one of the amazing benefits of the world that we live in. B1G1 works in a way that you can fund some of these impacts. So for example, you can start as a business owner, you can start from a simple $1 a day. So $365 starting point. And what you do with that is you're almost funding a shopping cart, and it's a terrible term, but you're funding a shopping cart.
Great analogy.
That you can then fill with impacts. So you're funding this $1 a day, and now we have this credit, I guess, available in your shopping cart system, and you can scroll through the thousands of impacts that are available, and you can say, I'll have that one and that one for things that make a difference to you. So it might be water for the kids, it might be influencing over here, it might be helping those people over there, it might be getting some clothing, some warm blankets for some people who are sleeping rough. These are the impacts that make a difference to me. Add that one to my cart, add that one to my cart, add that one to my cart, and then at the end we say, great, check out, and that money goes straight back to those people. And we keep using this word impacts, Paul, because I think one of the big differences with B1G1, and again, guys, it's B1G1, all in numbers, b1g1.com. One of the big things there that you've spent a lot of time obviously developing is what's called the impact tracker. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, I think one of the things we always wanted to do was make B1G1 very relevant and very meaningful, and looking at all the time how you can, add to that experience. And so absolutely correct. I mean, we track literally every cent. Or every impact at least. And then what's really magical is you can then just simply with a copy and paste link that to your site, and you can display it in various ways. You see the maps, you can see where the giving goes, you can see all of that kind of stuff. And so it's
from a business owner's perspective, they can hook up to B1G1, and
they literally it's literally in real time. It's literally in real time.
And so the customer who's shopping with you as a business owner can in your world add the big screen TV, and in the real time see the connection of then the funding going out to an orphan somewhere that may need that help that's provided for. So it really is incredible. And I love, when you spoke about Matsani's vision as she came in and spoke to you in that environment, where she said, imagine a world where every time a transaction took place, something good happens. And that's what you guys have been able to achieve. Paul, can I ask, like, one of the big, I guess, stigmas that exists around foundations and around environments of giving is making sure that 100% of what's given gets to where it needs to go. And I know that you guys have got a really strict process for vetting any of the impacts that are within the system. How does that all work with B1G1?
Yeah, and it's critically important, obviously, for all sorts of reasons. So the board of B1G1. So what happens, Walt, is projects apply. It could be, you could say, oh, there's this great project locally, and I love this project, I think it should be a part of B1G1. And then they apply, and it's very transparent, which is very beautiful. That's one of the beautiful things about it. And they can say, okay, these are the things that you've got to be able to do. You've got to open it up to us. You've got to let us work with you. We've got to see how everything works. We all of that.
No shady deals.
And that's exactly right. And then we check in all sorts of interesting ways that you wouldn't believe. I mean, and the result of that is that in some months, the board rejects as many as 9 out of 10 of the projects that apply. Now, interestingly, when they reject it, it's not, oh, we think you're bad or anything like that. It's like, hang on, if you actually work on this and we'll help you work on that, then we think you'll be doing something better.
It's that you need to help the people who are going to be supporting you understand it a little bit better. And, make sure that you tick these boxes before then you can access this incredible group of people.
And that's one of the reasons why I said earlier on that, it took a long time to figure this out. Right? And of course, we're still trying to, there's lots of things that, I think one of the great things about B1G1 is when you look at all of the innovation that's there, and there's a lot of innovation in there. And I think what's really cool about the innovation is that I was thinking about it the other day is that when we talk with our members, sometimes our members say to us, can we do that? And we go, oh, that's an interesting thought. Why don't we take a look at that? So there are, so many things that are going on and continue to go on where we're making it, more relevant and so on. I mean, and that's no different than all of the business owners listening to us now. I mean, it's very important to not rest and say, okay, well, it's done. Because that's a certain way of going backwards, right? No, there's no way we're done yet. Yeah, exactly.
I love it. I'm just reading through some of the projects, and I just wanted to read a few out for them so people could understand some of the impacts that are being made available because of the work of B1G1 and, of course, the companies that get associated with it. So let me just read a couple out here. Something as simple as giving a child a nutritious meal, available for 30 cents. So in other words, you funded this and you can just add that to your cart. And that's one of the things. You could give warm clothing.
And by the way, the crucial thing on that 30-cent one is that, and one of the things that's very interesting is the sort of circular nature of the B1G1 project. So, for example, that particular project, where, interesting enough, would you believe they produce 106,000 meals every day?
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And there are just 6 people involved in doing that. It's amazing.
Oh my goodness.
Right? Yeah. And all of those meals are delivered to schools. Now, why on earth are they delivered to schools? because the people in the slums, right, are saying to themselves, oh my gosh, the only way my kid can get fed is when my kid goes to school.
Wow.
So my kid goes to school, and guess what else happens when they get fed, right? So it's this beautiful, beautiful way of...
There's things as simple as give medical support to a child for a day for 8 cents. Give sweaters for cold winters. Feed a child at a school. Give a raincoat where it's needed. Give an education to a child for 44 cents. Give a lens for a cataract operation. Give a pair of shoes. Do you know what I mean? And it's so incredible. Things like giving access to a solar cooker for a family for 14 cents, being able to cook meals rather than to live without.
It is very, and that again, I think was one of the magic things, because yourself, Walt, as you work with entrepreneurs, many people have this view, which is, one day when I'm successful, I'll do this, right? And that's an understandable kind of thing that people say, and because they associate that making a difference in our world costs thousands of dollars, right? Yeah. What if that wasn't true? What if you could actually say on an email, right? Every time we send an email, a kid gets access to education. It's 1 cent, right? And you could do that. So when people say, well, when I'm successful, we response to that is, first of all, we understand that observation. Yeah. But what is it that you don't understand about this journey of entrepreneurship? One of the things that's so cool to us is we used to think that it was all about the giving, right? But there's a second order effect. And what I mean by that is recently we did, we started this actually about 3 years ago, of saying to our members, when you talk to people about V131, what do you say? And we thought that they would say, oh, well, you can give from 1 cent, 100% goes, you got all these projects. That's what we thought. And we were looking at their responses in a word cloud, as they would say, the responses, bang, it would be in the word cloud. And then at the end of 3 days, we took a look at the word cloud, and the big word, it was so clear, the big word was transform. And so we went back to it and said, hang on a second, that's amazing that you would say that this transformed. Why would you say that? And their response was equally interesting. And their response was, it shifted the spirit of that's organization, and that's it. Yeah, that is it.
Across the journey of an entrepreneur, there is that constant striving towards a goal. Do you know what I mean? That's the nature of an entrepreneur, is that we say, exactly. Where we are today is great, but I want to be there. And there's always that focus on an end goal and on an end result. And when you say it changes the spirit, I think it's important, because when we look at that journey of an entrepreneur, as I said, and our audience is that group, Paul. They're people that are out there trying to make a difference for themselves. They're trying to move the goalposts. They're trying to achieve more and do more. They don't necessarily want to be the next Steve Jobs, but they do want to take control of their lives and have an opportunity to make those forward moves tomorrow. As that journey happens, so often we understand as entrepreneurs that there's a cash flow crunch, that there's a tightening of the belt. There's a all of the ways you want to dress up the way of saying, damn, money's tight, right? And what happens, and I had this explained to me, and it really opened my eyes with B1G1, because it was an opportunity to do exactly what I'm about to talk about. When you're focusing on the fact that you need to tighten the belt, money's short, my goodness, my bank account is down to X, you're focusing on the fact that there is lack. And you're literally saying things are scarce. Whereas something that I've experienced, again, personally, is that when you are able to say, I understand that things are scarce. Believe me, I can relate to that 100%. But when you're actually able to say, no matter the fact that things are scarce, I can feed this kid for 30 cents and I'm still okay with that. It makes you feel like, hang on a second. It's not an environment of scarcity. There's actually plenty. There's abundance. And if we open our eyes and our hearts in the way that we accept that abundance, and let that flow out of us, I think that people will be surprised by the result.
Yeah, it's interesting you say it that way. I was doing a presentation the other day, and there's always a particular way that I start a presentation. Before I actually start it, I say some stuff to myself, right, before I get on stage. And this particular day, as I was saying stuff to myself, I thought about inward looking. And by the way, the words that I always say before I go on stage are pretty simple. They are for us, for us, for us, for us. It used to be, and this is interesting, it used to be for them, for them, for them. And then I realized that was sort of putting me apart. So it's now for us, for us, for us. But in any event, and I realized that let me see if this makes sense, because I'm not sure yet that this makes sense. So
let's test. This is the testing ground. Here we go.
Here's a test, right?
Here we go.
So just based on what you said. So frequently when those issues arise. By the way, I love the way you just described it. I loved the way you described it. Here's another way of thinking about it. Frequently people say, well, you've got to look inward. You've got to look inward. And I understand that's where we might have to look. But I thought for a minute, hang on a second, what if we would change that just for a second or two and say, well, instead of looking inward, let's just look outward. Let's just do that. Just for a minute. Let's look outward, and let's just really look what's there. In other words, let's move from a self-focus to an other focus. Right? Let's just do that for a second. And my observation is that when we do that, that what we suddenly see is a bigger picture. We see something that's bigger than ourselves, right? And what's really interesting is then if we can bring that bigger than ourselves into the work that we do, guess what? It makes the work that we do even bigger, right? Which is, but I love the way you said it.
Instead of, and again, it's the same thing, isn't it? Instead of focusing on how much of the pie we can have, how about we make the pie bigger?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all of those things. And I can hear the skeptics, Paul. I can hear them right now going, yes, but there's a standard line in every motivational speaker's thing where they talk about the airline hostess and the oxygen mask, and they tell you to put your own mask on first. And I
give it to the kid. Yeah.
And I say, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because they tell you to do that, but don't miss the second part of the message. The second part of the message is, yes, put your own mask on first so that you can help others. Do you know what I mean? So, it's not about self-preservation so that I can be strong and be okay. No. It's about doing that first so that you can, as you said,
there you go.
Outside and make sure that's a bigger impact.
No, that's a perfect way. That's a great way of saying it. A great way of saying it.
So true. So I'm noticing now that B1G1 has created incredible impacts in 32 countries.
Yeah.
And I find that absolutely amazing. Have you had an opportunity to travel and see firsthand some of those impacts?
Very much. I mean, every year, we do a thing called the B1G1 study tour, where some of our members choose to come with us on that. And it's very interesting, because there's lots of quote unquote charity tours, and we say no, because you got to be, it's not the way we do the study tours is it's not us. It's not we don't say to people, by the way, in order to come on this tour, you've got to raise 10 grand and or whatever the thing is. No. Because that's like, here are the people coming, and it's like as if we know everything and here's the money, go for it, right? We go there to learn. That's why we go there. And I tell you what, we learn some amazing things. Like, there's this particular project that's called the Mango Tree. And they're supporting, get this, they're supporting 9,000 orphans, 9,000 of them, right? Now, how are they doing that? Not in orphanages, right? But that doesn't seem to make much sense, right? For all sorts of reasons. So what they do, this is in Kenya, just around Lake Victoria. And so what they do is, in this particular project, they give them they make sure the orphans are placed with their sort of secondary family, if you will, their grandparents or whoever it is, right? And what they want to make sure is that those kids are not regarded as a liability, but they're regarded as an asset. So how do they do that? Well, what they've got is they've got these mango trees, just quickly. It's amazing. And they've grafted these mango trees with high growth Kenyan trees, right? And the result of that is this. First of all, a mango tree takes 8 years to grow normally, right? This one takes 2 years to grow. Second of all, when a mango tree grows, it's kind of like up here, you got to get up step ladders to, reach the mangoes. This one grows this high, so kids can actually pluck the mangoes. This one actually produces sweet mangoes. They're really cool mangoes. And what they do is they sell, because they don't want to make them dependent, they sell these little, shoots, the saplings, is that what we call it, to these families for $1.50, and they want them to get 10 of them. Now, why do they want them to get 10 of them? Because at the end of 2 years, for that first harvest, they harvest 8,000 mangoes. Now, what do those 8,000 mangoes do? Those 8,000 mangoes, actually, not only do they, sell them at the market and all that kind of stuff, but those 8,000 mangoes actually give them enough income to send 2 kids to school for an entire year.
Wow.
So it's not just...
Yeah, it's not about...
You get the idea. It's very different. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
And we come to see all of that, and it's like, it's obviously life-changing. And that's just the start. It's just amazing stuff that happens.
I love it.
Really
I love it, Paul. And I especially love the fact that this is built around commerce in terms of, it's built around the flow of money. As you're talking about the mangoes there. Mm-hmm. Like we as business people can understand the creation of a product that has a commercial value. It's not about anything other than commerce being moved through the world. And I think that's fascinating because we can relate to that as entrepreneurs. We can link it to our own businesses. We can do, as you said, every time that cash register rings, it does this overseas. It does this in the local community. It does this with a family. And, there's a lot of savings apps out there. And one that caught my eye was, I was in London recently, and there's billboards everywhere. So obviously they're making a lot of money from doing this particular exercise. Good on them. I love that. I like commerce anywhere it is. But the billboards were advertising something along the lines of round up your coffee and save for your future. So what it was, instead of spending, your coffee may be $3.90, and it will round it up to $4, but that 10 cents goes into a separate savings account. And at the end of, et cetera. And it's a big hit. People are, I've saved thousands of dollars more than I ever thought I could. The same principle exists now when we talk about this B1G1 operation, where we say to, and let's keep that example, let's say to the TV retailer, would you really miss $1 off that top end? In fact, if the customer said, I won't buy it unless you take $1 off, I'm sure you would. And I'm not saying margins aren't stable. I'm not saying that, costs of goods aren't raising. I'm not saying that your rent's not going up. I'm not saying all of that. But what I'm saying is that would you really miss that $1? Because you might not, but that family overseas might really, you might change that child's life. You might give that vision. You might put that meal on the table. You might change that community, and who knows where that will come back in the flow of things. So again, mate, I think it's an incredible...
And then, by the way, and you're quite right about the way in which you articulate that, because, so frequently you hear, and everything that we hear is, it's all well-meaning and all of those sorts of stuff, all those sorts of things. But there's a very significant distinction between somebody saying, X% of our profits goes somewhere, and that's one way of doing it, and saying, actually, when you did this, that tree got planted, or when you did this, that kid got to go to school for a day, or when you did this, that kid got a bicycle that would, save them, walking 20 kilometers to school.
It's an incredible message, isn't it? Because it is different, because as much as we all like to shop, what we don't like is that they are making so much profit from us. And so when somebody says we give 10% of our profits away, you go, yeah, but you keep the other 90%.
Yeah, and it's focusing on the profit too.
Exactly.
Right? So,
you're focusing on you know what? It's a message that says, great that you're giving 10% away, but you're keeping the 90, aren't you? You know, but it's different when we're in that shopping environment and we can say, hey, I bought this and I just feel good that the
exactly
pair of shoes, that the groceries I picked up, that the software application, that the whatever that I just spent money on is also supporting in a very direct and trackable way these operations, these organizations. And I think it's an incredible shift in the way that we're looking at money flowing through community.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's a great way. By the way, it's great chatting with you because you've got these fantastic.
Feel free to use them. Yeah, you know, I don't charge much.
Yeah, no. We'll quote you frequently.
No, absolutely.
It's awesome. It's just awesome.
So I know that. How far through the B1G1 journey are we now? As we look at Masani and yourself and the development, is it 6 years now that you guys have been in operation?
No. It's actually since that meeting that I talked about at the beginning. It's 12 years. 12 years since that meeting.
12 years, 200 million impacts, and growing.
Yeah. But the great thing now is, I was talking about the innovation and everything else, and the great thing now is that some of the things we're doing, just like entrepreneurs have to do, is to be aware of what's going on and to continue to innovate and to shift for certain things. So that now what we're doing is we're seeing. I'm very happy to be able to say hockey stick. Literal hockey stick growth, and what took us, 5 years to do, is now taking us 10 months to do, right? In terms, the impacts that are being created and so on, and that will accelerate as well as more people, get the message and go, whoa. I get the message sounds an arrogant way of saying it, and I didn't mean it in an arrogant way, but as more people look and say, whoa,
let's say as more people
that's really cool.
Let's say more people. Yeah. Because do you know what? One of the things that I've really loved about creating this podcast is that my vision is that there's someone in a car right now driving to work. They've got this probably on 1.5 or 2 speed, and they're filling their head with some good stuff before they get to the office this morning. Or, they're on the treadmill and trying to get through that last kilometer, and let's just tap into the Business and People podcast and hopefully we get some good stuff. So I want to focus on the B1G1 story in 2 ways for that individual who's listening right now. The first way is, of course, if you feel something is bigger than you and you want to get involved in B1G1, please go ahead and head on over b1g1.com, because it's something that is in existence, and I'm glad to have brought that awareness. But secondly, for that person in the car, secondly, for that person on the treadmill, look at the incredible, amazing business acumen and growth impact globally that came from an idea, passionately followed, with an assembly of high quality team members that is now making a difference and an impact globally. So when we're talking about B1G1, as an entrepreneur, and my message to you as you're listening is that look at it as an example of a business story that you can align with, because the growth of every business goes through the same phases in terms of idea, in terms of team assembly, in terms of product delivery, in terms of development, and in terms of growth. B1G1 has been through that. And of course, Mr. Paul Dunn, who we're talking to, has an incredible background and story in what we would traditionally call the corporate world and business. You can engage with that because they're on the same journey as you. And at the same time, when you head over to B1G1, when you get there, b1g1.com, have a look at some of the impacts that you can make. And it's not painful. It's the Panadol, Panadine, take an Advil method of impacting people around the world and communities and societies.
And well, that's a brilliant thing. And you know what? As you were talking to your listeners, there, by the way, thank you for listening as well. And you mentioned, people in the car. Well, here in Singapore, you don't have a car, right? So let me just imagine that person going in the car. And then you just imagine that, oh, they got to their place of destination and they either put it on the, in the car park or whatever. And there are now B1G1 members around the world who, when you park in their car park, in their office, they will have someone put a sticker on the car window, and you think, oh my God, I've got a parking fine or something like that. And so you open the ticket, and it says, we just want to say congratulations for being in our office today and using our car parks and stuff. And as a result of you doing that, 2 women in Malawi just got a business loan to help them do some great things. And then,
wouldn't it be great?
My big dream is to get a local council somewhere to say, whenever you pay a parking fine, something great happens.
Wouldn't it be great if people actually look forward to their parking fines? Every time you get that email, we used to all dread going to the post box, Paul. We used to dread because you get those envelopes with the window at the front, and you know damn well what's in the envelopes. It's not so that you can see inside and feel better about yourself. You know what's coming. That's a bill. But these days we get that as an email. Wouldn't it be great? Is when you push print, like you've just paid your bill, okay? So it might be the car washing bill or the window cleaning bill, or it might be your rent for the month, whatever. You just paid it, and you push print, don't we? Because we do that because we have to keep records for our accountants. We know that. You've worked with accountants all your life. So we've pushed print, and instead of the receipt coming out, what comes out is, thank you for supporting a family in Kenya who've just been able to send their 2 children to school. And then your receipt comes out, Just because of simple operations, then, the community can be, I guess, much tighter. We talked about, with Jim Rohn, and we talked about the way that fabric is woven together, with meeting Steve Jobs when he was an intern. With Jim Rohn made a massive difference to my life. So our stories actually cross over with a fabric, a thin line. And yes. I love this concept that these fabrics are being interwoven globally because of small acts that are being taken, and of course under the leadership of yourself and Masami.
Yeah, Masami is just awesome. She's tiny, and that whenever I think of her and introduce her, one of the things we often talk about is the power of small. And just about 5 minutes ago, when you were sort of summarizing all of that, you were spot on, and you were spot on when you said, as for all of us as entrepreneurs, it's very rarely one big hit that really makes the difference. It's a series of tiny little things that become rituals, tiny little things that become habits. Charles Duhigg wrote about that, as you know, in Power of Habit, and stuff. And it is that stuff that we do each and every day with a particular focus that actually gets us someplace. And a friend of mine put it this way. And often we remember our past, and we should. I mean, it's we got to build on that. But a friend of mine put it this way recently. He said, when your vision becomes more powerful than your memory, your future becomes more powerful than your past. And it's a really beautiful way of thinking about the impact of what you do. Seriously, Walt, on this podcast. I mean, just think about the fact that 10 years ago, it was like, podcast? What's that? Is that something to do with beans or something? But now, and a friend of mine said, recently, who was starting a podcast, and of course, a lot of people say, there's too many podcasts. And this guy said it this way. He said, you know what? There's only 1.25 million podcasts in the world. What a great way of saying it. And someone else said,
there's only one.
Yeah, there's that. And someone else said recently, tomorrow will never be as slow as today, right? And it's a beautiful way of saying that the space in which we are so privileged to be right now is a very exciting place. And we are seeing now things that we just could not have imagined, even as like 2 years ago. So, and fortunately, more and more people now, and through the great work that you're doing as well, understanding the impact that as entrepreneurs we have. And I love what Branson said when he was launching the Sustainable Development Goals with the UN in Geneva in 2015. In fact, on the 23rd of September 2015, And he said, I don't spend. It's the first time I've ever been at a United Nations building, and he said, but today is a very important day because it is the first day in history that the world body, you're going to love this, that the world body has recognized that it is not governments that change our world. Certainly governments can enhance that, can enable some of that. But when it's all boiled down, it's actually businesses, entrepreneurs, and their teams that actually change our world. And what I think is really nice about, and then that's when he started talking about the goals. And what I think is really nice about this conversation, Walt, and thank you so much for it, is that we see it's moving from that kind of idea of, yeah, actually that's true, and then going, oh, I wonder what tools are around to help me do that. Absolutely. And so hopefully B1G1 fits in that space where now we don't have to have it as an ideal. We can actually have it as something that happens literally every second, every day, and in every way.
Woven into the fabrics of changing your own tomorrow.
Yeah,
be changing
exactly.
So many other people's. Paul, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and say hi. I really do value the leadership that you're providing to the B1G1 organization, and looking at the background that you've had. I'm thrilled that you're able to bring that experience and that passion into such an environment that is impacting so many people's worlds. And of course, I'd love to keep in touch with yourself and Masami. And for the listeners, people who are listening, please understand this. You as entrepreneurs, as individuals in this universe, in this world, are making massive differences each and every day that you're operating. Each and every time you're making a decision, you are impacting and creating ripples around you. And for that, that's why I love you as an entrepreneur and as somebody that's looking to change their tomorrows. As part of that journey, it's my privilege to introduce B1G1 and hope that those ripples can cross over at some point. But regardless of where this message finds you, thank you for doing what you do in the way that you do it, because that is the impact that you're able to take forward. Paul, thanks again for joining us tonight. I really have enjoyed the time.
Absolute privilege to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
I look forward to keeping up with you, and do let us know about the impacts and some of the goals and success stories, because I'm sure that the people would love to hear it. We'll happily make a place for you on the Business and People podcast blog site. If you've got some stories you'd like to share,
got it.
To push that out there as well. So again, Paul, thanks very much, mate. I really appreciate it.
Hey, well, thank you. Thank you. Awesome stuff.
Cheers, bud. Thanks.